So I told John, before I start my talk, I'm doing a snake story too.
Perfect.
Mine has to do with somebody who is afraid of snakes. And who came to me one day and said, I'll let you guess who it is. Ron, there's a snake in our house. And I said, how big? And of course, it was like the biggest snake in the history of the world. And she said, it crawled under the bed. So I crawl under the bed, and I grab it, and I start to pull it, and it starts to rattle its tail. And I let go really fast. And I called up, and well, that's what I thought it wasn't, but I wasn't taking any chances. So I called up animal control, and this young woman comes. She looks like they're dressed in sheriff's outfits. And we looked for 45 minutes, and we cannot find this snake. So she said, well, if you see it again, give me another call. Well, the next day, we didn't see the snake, but it did leave us a little gift in our bedroom, so we knew it was still there. And 2 days later, if you can picture this, Becky goes into our guest bathroom and opens the closet and says, the snake is in the closet. And so I go and I open it, and there he is. And it's really as big as she said. It was a pretty good size, it was a razor snake. So we closed the closet door, and then we closed the bathroom door, and Becky stuffs a towel under the bathroom door, and then like a soldier stands on alert with a broom. This is all a true story. And I call back animal control, and they say, well, it's gonna be 45 minutes till we get there. And Becky is standing there with a broom, and sure enough, the snake sticks its head out, and Becky hits him in the head with the broom, and he goes back in. And this happens like 4 or 5 times. He's trying to come out of the bathroom, and Becky bashes him in the head. When animal control comes, we open up the door to the bathroom, and he's back in the closet. And as soon as we open the door, he comes charging, first at me, and then at the animal control lady. And she looks at me, and she said, I've never seen one of these black razors this aggressive. And I said to her, you haven't seen one? My wife's been beating the crap out of her for the last few. So that's our snake story. So the title of the message today is How to See Yourself as You Really Are. And I want to begin with 2 quotes from Ernest Holmes. And the first one is, he said, no limit can be placed upon the spirit of man. It merges with the universal spirit, for the two are really one. And the second quote, he said, whatever is true of the universe as a whole must be true of the individual as some part of this whole. And how I took those two, and how I still do, very often when I do a treatment in step 2, when you're unifying, I say to myself that I am not all of God, but God is all of me. And the second way I take it in is I am a part of this divine presence, and I can use it. So I want to read to you, I'm not going to read this whole thing, just a piece of an article that I wrote for Science of Mind magazine. I don't even remember when, but it's been a few years. Recently, I read an article describing the greatest regrets that people have on their deathbeds. The single biggest regret was not living a life that was true to themselves. They lived their life to meet others' expectations. In the book Spiritual Maturity, Joseph Sharp writes of a patient who was dying from AIDS, telling him, "I just want you to know, if I could do it all again, I'd be more outrageous. You know, give them hell, be more myself." How sad. We can avoid that fate by remembering that we're here for a purpose, and that the greatest, most loving power in the universe is waiting to help us live the life we dream about. So you might ask, where do I begin? The answer is simple: wherever you are. Ernest Holmes tells us when we are unsure where to start, we should pause and listen. We must trust that the same power that started all things will also start us in the right direction. It does not matter what happened in the past. We can move beyond any disappointment, obstacle, setback, or discouragement. And just one last thing. On a recent awards program, George Lucas was being honored. His friend Steven Spielberg was telling the audience George's philosophy of life. He said, "George believes, don't listen to your parents. Don't listen to your peers. Don't listen to your culture. Only listen to yourself. That's where you'll find your truth. Our truth lies within, because that's where spirit resides." So we know that spirit, that God is without limits, but we need to provide the consciousness, because in order to work for us, spirit has to work through us. So Joel Goldsmith is a pretty famous New Thought writer, and he wrote that every issue in life is determined not by external conditions, but by consciousness. And he said, so the question is, how do we bring God into our consciousness? And he uses kind of what I thought was an interesting example. He uses music as his example. And he said, so if you don't know the principles of music and you pick up an instrument to play, it's probably really going to sound discordant. However, you don't blame the principles of music, right? You practice, you learn, and you get better. And when we do have our own experience of God, we practice spiritual principles so we can get better. And you know the things we do. We can do prayer. We can spend time in silence. We can read. And there's one other one I do want to talk about for a minute, because I've done talks on this, but in all honesty, I never realized exactly how important it was until the last year and a half, until we closed my center. And that one is community. I bet, without exaggeration, every week Becky says to me, I miss community. I miss our community. And we try to do a couple of things, but it's not really enough. So we're going to try to think of more. And so I just want you to know, to really appreciate, you're not big church, but you are here, and I see the same faces when I come. And that's your community. Those are the people that when you're hurting, you can turn to, that are going to support you and love you and show you caring and kindness and compassion. And you can't overstate them. I was thinking today when I was driving here, when when I lived in Maine, we were talking before about places that I've lived in. When I lived in Maine, I got divorced, and it was a really, really difficult time. And I called up one of my friends one day when I was really hurting, and he came over, and I just started to sob, and he put his arms around me, and he held me, and he whispered in my ear, "Don't worry, Ron, we'll get through this." Not you'll get through it, we'll get through it. And that's community, that's what you all have. And don't ever take it for granted, because it's really, really important. So Alan Cohen, maybe some of you have heard this, maybe not. Alan Cohen tells a story of an eagle that's living with a group of chickens. And one day, a naturalist happens to come by the farm where he is, and he says to the farmer, "How come that eagle is with your chickens?" And the farmer says, "Honestly, I don't really know. One day, a few years ago, I came across this eaglet. I don't know where its mother was, if it just left him or it was killed or what, but I took him home. I put him with the chickens. I feed him what I feed the chickens, and he thinks he's a chicken. Can't fly, he just behaves like a chicken." And the naturalist says to the farmer, "If he's an eagle, he has the heart of an eagle. He can be taught to fly." So they agree to try, and they take this eagle, and they go up to the highest hill in the area. They hold him up, put him up, and nothing happens. And they do that a couple of times, and nothing happens. And just as they're about to do it, the third time, as life would have it, what comes soaring overhead but an eagle? And they hold up this eagle, and when he sees the other eagle, he starts to tremble. His whole body starts to tremble. And this time they take him and they throw him up, and he soars. The moral of the story, the point of the story is, the eagle represents our unlimited power and potential. I always used to tell my congregation, all of us are spiritual powerhouses, because we can combine with the divine presence to create the life we choose. The chicken represents that part of us that's fearful and believes in limitation. And the truth is, like many of us, we've lived like that eagle, with mistaken identity. We've kind of had a case of spiritual amnesia, and it causes us to believe in limits and limitation. And the truth is, the only thing that really limits us on our spiritual path is our own beliefs. And our goal on the spiritual path isn't to change anything about us. It's to remember who we are. The Meister Eckhart, who lived in the 12th or 13th century, he said once, this isn't a quote, it's kind of a paraphrase, that the spiritual life isn't about addition, it's about subtraction. And what he meant is, as we go through our life, we pick up fears, we pick up ideas of limitations, all these false ideas. And what spiritual life is about is subtracting all of those to get back to who we really are. So I want to tell you a fable about somebody named Willow. And Willow lived in medieval times, and his goal in life was to become a wizard. And so he practiced. I don't know what you do to practice being a wizard, but whatever you do, he did it. Because once a year, the wizard in his village chose one person to be his apprentice for the year. And that year, Willow was one of the 3 people that was chosen. And the test was, the wizard held up his hand and he said, "Which finger is my power in?" And he held up his thumb. And none of the potential apprentices said anything. Well, he went through all of his fingers and nobody said anything. They were all silent. And so he said, well, since nobody had an answer this year, I'm not going to choose anybody. So our boy Willow goes off and he becomes a soldier. And he faces all kinds of fears, all kinds of tribulations, and he gets past all of them. And he gains a lot of wisdom and a lot of strength. And so, in short, Willow the boy becomes Willow the man. And he decides one day to go back to the village. And so he goes back to his village, and he spends some time with the wizard. And the wizard says to him, "Willow, tell me something. When I held up my fingers and asked which finger the power was in, what were you thinking?" And Willow says, "I thought to myself, the power is in my own hand." And the wizard looked at him and he said, "Why didn't you say that?" And Willow said, "Because I was embarrassed. It seemed a little arrogant." And the wizard said to him, "My boy, that was the right answer." And Willow said, I know now. I know that. I realize the power is within me." And the wizard said, "Well, if you realize that, then you've become the master." And what he was really saying to him is, when we realize that the power lies within us, we become the masters of our own life. So I want to read you a quote. I don't know who wrote this, but the person that did said, "Deep within man, there dwells these slumbering powers, powers that would astonish him, forces that would revolutionize his life if aroused and put into action." So Barbara DeAngelis is another spiritual writer, and one of the books she wrote is called Soul Shifts. And so she starts off by saying, what's a soul shift? And a soul shift is an interaction. And she writes that rather than fixing things externally, fixing things from the outside, we take interactions. We make shifts in consciousness from within. We transform our lives from the outside, from the inside out, from the inside out. And our way of experiencing life changes. It's like putting on a new pair of glasses and seeing ourselves in the world differently. And just as an explanation, there's a story about a young couple who gets married and they move into a new house. And the first morning they're having breakfast, the wife turns to the husband and she says, "Oh, look, our neighbor has all of her wash drying on a line outside. She must not use very good detergent. It looks kind of gray. It doesn't look very lively." And every morning when they're having breakfast, the wife says that again. "I guess she's using the same detergent. Her stuff doesn't have a lot of life to it. The whites aren't really white." And they wake up one day she comes out, she says, oh my God, she must have changed her detergent. Look at those clothes, they look great. And the husband said, she didn't do anything. I got up early today and watched our windows. The point, it's from within. So, have anybody familiar with Jean Houston? I know you are. So Jean Houston, again, is a spiritual writer, and she does all kinds of workshops. And I got to know her. I attended a workshop at one of our conferences where there were like 200, 250 people in the audience, and she actually facilitated a workshop, which is no easy feat. Well, she has an exercise that she does when she does workshops that she calls the God game. I want to tell you about it. So here's what it is. She asks everybody to close their eyes and move about. And so you can imagine when people have their eyes closed and are moving about, what happens? They bump into one another. And when you bump into somebody, you're supposed to say, are you the God in hiding? And the person you bump into is supposed to respond, are you the God in hiding? Everybody but one person. One person that Jean has spoken to beforehand that says, you remain in silence. And whenever anybody bumps into that person, they too have to remain silent. They're, so to speak, guarded. And this goes on for a while, and you could see that eventually the room is going to be totally silent. Everybody has been guarded. And then Jean tells them they can open up their eyes. And when they do, she says, without fail, people look around the room and they see all of the other gods not in hiding, and they start to laugh and they hug each other. And she said, and what they see the truth that the game draws out something that's found in every spiritual tradition. We all contain a God seed, a divine essence that can be nurtured through spiritual practice. So a lady named Trudy Ann Ewan wrote, many people don't even realize that they're living a limited life. They've lived it for so long, it's kind of just what is. That's how they see life. They believe that they're limited, when in truth, the only restrictions that we have are the ones that we believe that we have. And what's really fascinating to me personally is that children have unlimited dreams. And somewhere along the way, they die. And they've done experiments where psychologists have gone into a school. I want to tell you about two different ones. They go into a school and they go to second graders and they say to the second graders, what do you want to be when you grow up? And these kids throw answers at them, you know, policeman, fireman, doctor, nurse, or whatever. They, in the same school, go to the high school kids, ask them the same question, and they get nothing back in return. And Carl Sagan, the late astronomer, he did the same thing. He would go into a second grade class, talk to them about science, you know, at their level, and then see if they have any questions. And these kids would inundate them. There's no such thing as a stupid question, you know, to a second grader. Go into high schools and do the same thing and get nothing back from them. Nothing. And the point is that passion doesn't wear out. It doesn't wear out. It dies from lack of use. And it kind of makes you wonder, what are we doing to our kids that by the time they're 14 and 15 years old, it's gone to a great extent. Rabbi Doug Heller said that for all eternity, there's never going to be another you. And he said that imitation is death and uniqueness is life. And he said we need to listen to our own voice, because when we follow others, we become a cheap copy. Think about that now. This is a rabbi. That's pretty strong language to say. When you follow somebody else's voice, you become nothing but a cheap copy. He wrote, there are voices all around us telling us who we should be, but somewhere amidst those voices is our own. When we listen to our voice, we take ownership of our life. And the truth is, my voice and your voice know what's right for you. And when we follow that voice, that's what frees us. So I want to close. I couldn't decide which quote to use, so I'm going to do them both. From a book called I Will Not Die an Unlived Life by Donna Markova. And she said, I don't believe that our existence in this world is a random accident. Maybe it is, but I don't believe it. I believe there is more to life than living each day as it comes. The great cellist Pablo Casals agreed. He said that through the whole of recorded history, there has never been another such as you. Each of us is a miracle of uniqueness. Each of us, therefore, is responsible for the discovery of our sustaining passions and rhythms, the cultivation of the green fields in which we can discover what keeps us connected to the full fertility of our soul and all it has to give to the world. And then what I'm going to read to you next, Donna said, she wrote this, she said, I wrote this poem the night my father died with a shrug. His heart was hollow and vacant of dreams. He was convinced he didn't matter. And this is what she wrote. I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear of falling or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days, to allow my living to open me, to make me less afraid, more accessible, to loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my significance, to live so that that which came to me as seed goes to the next as blossom, and that which came to me as blossom goes on as fruit. God bless you.